Hello and welcome to episode 5 of the Conatus Views podcast. My name is Scott Davies and joining me this week is Sarah Ali Rakia. Welcome, Sarah.
Hello.
All right, so we've got a lot to get through this week, and I thought that we'll start with actually my latest article on Conatus News. So basically, earlier this week, I wrote an article entitled "When Bag Regulation Stops You from Working," and the premise of the article is basically about occupational licensing laws and regulations, primarily in America, but also across the Western world. And basically, it talks about the rise of these regulations and these rules, how there's, in some cases, they're stopping people, especially from sort of working and lower middle class backgrounds, from being able to enter the workforce in occupations such as, like hairdressing and plumbing and that sort of thing. And basically how this is like an impediment to, obviously, to being able to work, to be able to sort of, make a living for yourself, and how that is obviously an impediment to sort of economic growth more broadly, sort of, economic freedom, and that sort of thing. I know you've, as a libertarian, you've quite passionate about these sort of issues. So I just wanted to get sort of like your initial thoughts on the article and sort of this issue of occupational licensing more briefly.
Yes. So first of all, it was a pleasure for me to read. I really enjoyed it. So thank you for writing that. Secondly, this has been something I have struggled to explain to a lot of my friends who are new to the United States, who practice a trade, and they wonder why. They'll say something like, I understand why somebody would need a license to, say, be a brain surgeon, but why? Because there are lives at stake. But why need the licensing to be a barber, for example, or nail tech, or anything kind of cosmetology related, these types of trades? Health is a big issue. So the hygiene inside of nail salons, for example, can mean the difference between having lovely nails and losing a finger. So there are some health regulations that one needs to be cognizant of. But you see, it can be just as similar as working at McDonald's and your manager at McDonald's telling you that you need to wash your hands before you flip this burger.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. That's great. Yes, go wash your hands before you flip a burger. It's fine. It's the same. It's the same, very similar theoretical framework here. So, for example, I had known a woman who was an immigrant to this country, and she opened her own beauty school, and she runs a amazing nail salon where her students are guaranteed work there. It's not just a nail salon; it's like a whole kind of beauty salon.
Yeah.
And it's truly magnificent because the treatment you get is amazing, and then the price is affordable, and it's just kind of that immigrant success story, American dream success story, everything kind of done the right way. This is great. This is excellent. But when it comes to someone, let's say someone is just naturally talented. So a lot of these women who go to a beauty school, for example, they want to learn how to do makeup. They want to learn how to cut hair. They want to learn how to paint nails. And same with men who go to a barber school. They want to learn how to do these things.
Yeah.
For some people, artistry comes naturally, and you'll even see it in their young age, that they will have this kind of proclivity for artistry, and they will be young kids who just make amazing artwork, and we've all seen it. Some people in general are just passionate about art. They're very They just happen to be very good at things like cutting hair, doing somebody else's makeup, or doing somebody else's nails, or things like this, beauty salon type of things. If someone is able to do these things, and what it comes down to, as far as regulation, what it comes down to is hygiene and licenses regarding the hygiene, all these things. Do you really need to pay for a beauty school to teach you something that is just kind of across the board? All beauty salons should be acting like, behaving this way, just because it is basic hygiene, right?
Yeah.
So why can't this just be part of the employment training process, like in many jobs where they provide training? A lot of folks who pursue, not all, but a lot of folks who pursue a sort of career in something that is regarding cosmetology and things of this nature, they'll come from neighborhoods that are perhaps lower income neighborhoods, which means they probably have a lower income in general. So they're saving their money, and they're trying to, they're going for that pursuit of happiness, right?
Yeah.
Which is their right. But if you come from a neighborhood that is kind of a bit poorer, and you yourself have a lower income, how are you going to go and afford a cosmetology school to teach you all the things that you can already do, when you can just have your employer train you? Like in almost any other job, you will get training from your employer. So to train you in regards to health. So this is something that I've heard a lot. A lot of people will laugh at it and sweep it under the rug. I'm not sure if anybody watching remembers Paula Abdul, when she made the uproar about nail salons, and everyone thought that she was just like this little like she was being a bimbo about it, right? Like she's kind of ditzy or whatever, making this kind of uproar about nail salons. Actually, she was a fucking genius, because it is so true. Like I said earlier, sometimes going into a nail salon means the difference between having pretty nails afterwards or losing a finger, because there are some infections that are quite serious. So yes, being clean, cleanliness, and these kinds of regulations, of course they're important, but they can be taught. So when you are telling people who are most likely coming from lower income neighborhood that they need to go get a cosmetology license, what you are saying is you never want them to get out of a lower income neighborhood, and you never want a lower income neighborhood to prosper. That is what you're saying to me. Not you personally, but that is what how it comes off to me and to people like me. I'm sure there are many who agree with me on that. That's how it comes off.
Yeah, there's that was one of the points I actually raised in my article as well. Is not only the fact that there are these sort of regulations, it's also not only the cost of the license itself, but also there's a very big time cost for a lot of these. For some of these licenses, there's several hundred hours worth of mandatory study, and then sort of like an exam you have to sit, which will cost probably a few $100s, and then getting the actual license itself is sometimes over $1,000. Which, if you know from a working class background, that's a massive expense, and a lot of the time it's kind of dubious sort of why you would need this. Within my article, I raised a few examples of this. One of them being there was a case of a man in Arizona. He was cutting men's hair, homeless men's hair, basically free of charge, wanting to help them sort of clean up. So. Helping out for sort of job interviews, clean them up for general presentation, that sort of thing. And then I think it's like the Barbers Guild or whatever it's called in Arizona got a lot of this, and they're like, hold on, you haven't sort of gone through the licensing system and all that process. So they tried to shut it down. And then fortunately, the governor of Arizona, Doug Ducey, actually caught a lot of this and basically shut down an investigation and then cleared the man of any wrongdoing. His name escapes me. It was a Wall Street Journal article. It's linked within the article if you want to check that one out. But yeah, and then obviously the Arizona governor, having sort of heard about this case, is now looking to reform licensing laws more generally, because he's sort of really become cognizant of the fact that, you know, you've got these sort of cases like this, and there's kind of, you know, it's a case of government overreach. Is, you know, licensing, like, is, you know, it's done with good intentions, obviously, you know, for consumer safety and that sort of thing, but you have to be cognizant of the fact that, you know, there are sometimes unintended consequences, which is, you know, acting as an impediment to employment, to, you know, financial independence and that sort of thing. And that was what I was trying to get at with my article, is this idea that, you know, there's sometimes unintended consequences for, you know, well-intended government policy. And this is something that I think is not only, like, it's often sort of framed as like a libertarian or conservative sort of issue, and I made this point in the article, but increasingly it's become like a bipartisan sort of economic reform. Like, a lot of sort of, you know, Democrats and sort of centre-left political figures are getting on board with occupational licensing, which I think is a very good thing, because politics, as we know, is becoming a lot more sort of fragmented and tribalistic. So, you know, on the rare occasion that, you know, there's bipartisan consensus for what is, you know, very good reform, you know, that should be, you know, applauded, it should be celebrated, and you know, it should be encouraged as much as possible. So what do you think of that?
I completely agree. Jesus. I completely agree with what you're saying. It is not any certain type of issue confined to one political party or political affiliation. So this is not just a issue for any one political party. This is an issue for anyone who cares about the welfare of their fellow woman or man or whoever. This is an issue for people who love humanity. This is an issue for people who love not just their neighbors, but the neighborhood next to their neighborhood, and are concerned about that. And, you know, even if you don't love your neighborhood next to your neighborhood, or a few miles away from your neighborhood, maybe you don't love them, you don't care, you whatever. If we elevate the status or allow people to pursue their happiness and elevate their own status, that is only going to make our society as a whole better. If people are doing better in general, that will make society as a whole do better. I do believe that. So, for example, people who show that they care about their, for example, they care about schools getting shot at or something like that, or school shootings. Sorry. So they're worried about school shootings, or they're worried about gun violence in general. And so the argument on one side will be, oh, well, the cities with the harshest, strictest gun laws have the most gun violence, right? And then the counter argument to that will be, well, that's because people are bringing in their guns from places with lax gun laws and then selling them on the black market. Well, do you not think that this theoretical framework is kind of applicable in general? It's quite applicable in general. The point is, if we decrease poverty, if we decrease these feelings of desperation within people, the people who can afford to go to beauty school are the people who are going to university, right? And they are studying. I'm a very proud social scientist, but I'm not going to call out any specific departments, because all departments are different across the board and all knowledge is important. Stay in school. Can. But these folks are the ones who are going and studying something that they have a luxury to study and that they don't actually use and apply at all in their once they choose a career path. That being said, you're asking people from a low-income neighborhood to, hey, just go to a cosmetology school. That means you don't care about your community. To me, that signals a group of people who maybe they're not actively not caring about their community. Maybe they're not consciously doing it, but it's there. It's still happening, and they are essentially attacking their own community by being this short-sighted and by not taking everything into a perspective other than what they are used to, what they're used to seeing. So when we hear regulations, and you're not a libertarian or an anarchist, when you hear the word regulation, a lot of people love this word. Yes, regulations. Yes, keep us safe. However, regulations are not always there for our own good. Sometimes they do work against us. And I can give some examples of how the government and how regulations, government enforced regulations have hurt entire communities of people. For example, the young women and girls that I grew up with that were married off as child brides, or were taken on a vacation to the Middle East or South Asia, a vacation, as they were told. They were told it's a vacation. They never returned. They were married off, and that was that. The U.S. government was powerless, did not protect these girls. And if we're going to say, oh, that happens overseas, it didn't happen within our borders, it also happens within our borders where sick older men and younger women, girls, children, are married off to older men by their sick families. The government doesn't protect them. In fact, the government allows this to happen, either with laws and regulations that are enforced or are not in place. So we need to ask ourselves that bigger question, and I think that your article really is a good one to look at. I might be a little bit of an extremist, but Scott, you can always count on Scott to be a centrist. He is centered, and the article is excellent, and it really kind of portrays everything like from all sides. It's very multidimensional, and it's also it's a good read. I think it's also a very palatable read in general, which I always appreciate when it's something that I can send to a friend who is like a STEM nerd who doesn't know anything about social science and can read a certain article or a certain piece of literature that I know I can recommend this to anybody. That's there's something to be said about that. So, and that's the goal, at least for me. That's been my goal, to be able to reach as many people as possible. And I truly believe that that this article, what you wrote, Scott, is quite palatable, reaches out to a lot of people, and makes a lot of folks stop and ask some questions about themselves, and about the role of government in their own oppression.
Thanks. I really appreciate those kind words. That's very kind of you. Yeah, so kind of like what you were getting at, kind of my idea for writing this article was it wasn't necessarily meant to just sort of be this, libertarian run of, government regulation is bad and all that sort of thing. It's sort of more to think, okay, you have this goal. Obviously, everyone wants as many people as possible to to be able to work, to be able to earn a good wage, to have financial independence and that sort of thing. obviously people on the right and sort of libertarians, conservatives have one way of pursuing this goal, and people on the left, social democrats, that sort of thing, have another, which happens to be, you know, more, has more like a government friendly sort of approach to it. And what I was just sort of trying to get at is, you know, you have this, obviously, for example, the issue of occupational licensing, and it sounds like a good idea in theory. You know, you want the marketplace to work in a way that you know, consumers can have like a guarantee of sort of safety and certain standards in their in the services and products that they consume. But sort of what I was thinking with the article was to think, okay, there are some cases where this idea of you know, occupational licensing backfires, and it has the opposite of the intended effect. And it's not necessary to say that all licensing is bad. I obviously put out some examples of, you know, for example, you obviously want a teacher to be qualified and go through the correct sort of background checks and that sort of thing, if they're going to be working with children and that sort of thing. Obviously, doctors, surgeons, that sort of thing. Occupational licensing, perfectly fine. What I'm just saying is some of the jobs and occupations where it's required now, you know, you have to think, doesn't necessarily need, you know, licensing. Do you necessarily need to go through an extensive series of checks and that sort of thing? And it's just sort of, it's kind of like to play devil's advocate in a way. And obviously, then I went on to sort of cite some research and evidence that, you know, perhaps licensing doesn't necessarily guarantee standards that it might do. How licensing, it can benefit, obviously, the person that holds the license in terms of like they have better sort of pay and conditions, that sort of thing. But for everyone else outside of that system, it means, you know, a lesser variety of services. They have to pay more for the service and that sort of thing. So it's kind of like, okay, there are some, you know, good things to occupational licensing, but here are also sort of the downsides, and sort of like, okay, you kind of need to weigh both sides of the issue up. Yeah, and that was basically my thinking around that.
I mean, I do think that regulations regarding licensing, I do think that regulations can be enforced by the employer at the discretion of the employer. And when it comes to these sort of trades, when it comes to beauty salons, barbershops, all these kind of things, yeah. It is sanitation is very important. It's like a restaurant. You don't want people being nasty and cooking your food, or you're gonna get sick, unless you have Iraqi genes and you don't get sick from dirty food. Yes. So you want some sort of regulation to be there, yes, but why does it need to be enforced by the government? What role does the government play in that? When, as I said, I don't want to keep repeating that, but as I said, it can be a part of a basic training. And if the people are more involved with what's going on in their community, rather than want to be babysat by their government, I think that leads to a better society in general overall.
Yeah, and I think
by the people, for the people.
Yeah, it's I think this whole occupational licensing thing, it kind of gets to the core of I guess what role you think government should play in society, and I think that's probably why my article has sort of resonated with a lot of people. Is that, okay, on the surface it seems kind of this sort of very technical, you know, wonky sort of issue, which is sort of the realm of like policy analysts and people that are way into economics and that sort of thing. But if you sort of step back a little bit and think of, you know, some of those real world examples that I cited within the article, you kind of get to this more philosophical argument of, okay, what role does sort of the government play in the economy, how much should it intervene, in what cases should it intervene, and that sort of thing. Obviously, yourself, Sarah, being a libertarian, you have one particular view. Some other people that have got feedback from it are sort of being more like, okay, we're kind of concerned that if you sort of leave it to kind of like more, free market, laissez-faire sort of style, then, you're going to have issues come up. And, there's valid things to take from both those perspectives. But you have to be able to have these conversations, and you have to be able to think about these important sort of philosophical issues from both sides. Like I said, and I sort of concluded the article with the fact that it's sort of like a bipartisan issue, because both left and right can sort of see, okay, there's some problems with the status quo, but for different reasons, and that's why they sort of want to reform that. I think that sort of covers that article. We'll move on to the next topic, which is something that came up a few days ago. You'll probably know more about this than I do, Sarah, being from America. It's about a university professor from Fresno State University. So I believe she was like a creative writing professor. So basically, this professor, when the former First Lady, Barbara Bush, passed away a few days ago, she basically tweeted some quite vitriolic things about the former First Lady and about her husband as well. And then when people were rightly sort of outraged about this, what she sort of posted, she basically said, I have tenure, so you can't fire me. This is sort of like a First Amendment right thing. And then she went on to do this very strange thing, which I don't fully understand, is apparently she like tweeted out a link to the Arizona State University crisis number to people that were sort of criticizing her. Sarah, would you be able to sort of explain a bit more about this case?
Yes, well, it was actually brought to my attention by a friend of mine. So I have friends. Sometimes I will wake up in the morning, and this particular friend wakes up like with the chickens, wakes up at 4 a.m. in the morning, right? So by the time I'm up and I'm looking at my phone, I see the article. I see her commentary. She's like, did you see this? What do you think of this? This is all the messages I'm getting, like just so many in a row. So I'm looking at these messages, and I'm looking at what this woman is saying. I look into her background, and I have some things to say about that. So she is she's born in the United States, this professor, but she did move to the Middle East for some portion of her life. But she is U.S. born. So this happens a lot, but I don't want to pinpoint, but these ideas that are coming out of her mouth are obviously radical. If you are celebrating the death of a woman who is a proponent of other women's rights, and you as a woman are celebrating her death and saying that she raised a war criminal, there is something terribly wrong. There's something a bit, it's a red flag to me. Somebody somewhere along the line got brainwashed. It is the red flag that appears to me when I see something like this. So one of the first things that I thought was, okay, you are a second-generation Arab American woman, so am I. You're the reason why a lot of us are embarrassed. People, second-generation Arab Americans are, a lot of times are the ones who have so many things to say about things they have never experienced and are not pertinent to them. So for her to say that about First Lady Barbara Bush after her passing, which is, by the way, very disrespectful, but she's entitled to say whatever she wants. I'm just saying it's in very bad taste and reflects poorly on the university that she teaches at, in my opinion. But if you are a second generation Arab American, and at that, she's not Iraqi. She's not Iraqi. I think she was
I think she's not Egyptian.
So she is part Egyptian, part Palestinian. So, I mean, she's not Iraqi is my point. She doesn't have an Iraqi background. She's American born. She is saying George W. Bush. What she is saying, what she's suggesting is George W. Bush is a war criminal. She's saying this as a second generation Arab American. Not as a second generation Egyptian Palestinian American. Not even Iraqi. Okay, so she's not even Iraqi. And she is saying this as if she lived it. As if she lived it enough to say, oh, it was a war criminal. She raised a war criminal. And to condemn the mother like that. I mean, I haven't looked at her previous works, but I would love to see. Actually, I wouldn't really love to, but in social science, you kind of have to see her work regarding before Barbara Bush's passing. Did she have any qualms with Barbara Bush before that? This is really embarrassing, actually, to many first-generation Arab American immigrants who love this country, who love being here in the United States, and they do not feel the same way as her. However, these are the highly ignorant voices that make the news, that make the media. And these are that becomes the representation of Arab Americans, of the Arab American community. We are represented by a woman who lauds the death of a former first lady. This is supposed to be our representation. And on top of that, she's a tenured professor. She's teaching the next generation of intellectuals. There's just so many things wrong here. So many things wrong here. It's almost like you want to just press the restart button. There's just so many things wrong here. She should stick to creative writing and stop with the creative commentary, because she does not represent us. She doesn't speak for us. She doesn't speak for the first generation of Iraqi American immigrants. I don't even speak for the first generation of Iraqi American immigrants. So this is just, it's absolutely abhorrent. It's a humiliation, and it is a damn shame that she is in a position to be teaching, as I said, the next generation of intellectuals.
Yeah, I think you raised a very good point there, because there's obviously been a lot of commentary around this, a lot of it about, obviously, you know, it's her First Amendment right and that sort of thing. Not so much about, obviously, for one, sort of her responsibility in her sort of position, which is quite an important one. Obviously, you know, she's obviously like a professor at a university, receiving sort of public funding for a job. Like you said, she's obviously influencing the next generation of sort of creative writers within her position. And then also the fact that, and this is the point I think I've only heard you raise, which is that whether it's right or not, she's going to be considered to be sort of like the voice or the face of sort of second generation Arab Americans and their perspective and their point of view, despite the fact that obviously what she said is very sort of radical, and I would obviously not speak for the vast majority of of second generation Arab Americans who may or may not agree with sort of her politic of First Lady Bush's politics or whatever, but they would never, cheer on her death or make disparaging remarks about her being dead. So I think that's a very important point that you raised there.
There is freedom of speech, yes, and I love it. I love it. But there's no freedom of consequences. So she's free to say what she wants, and I'm free to say that it's stupid and harmful to her community. I'm a member of her community. You are harming us. This is what I would like to get across to my fellow second generation Arab Americans and beyond, that we are not the voice of immigrants who just came here. We are not the voice of different waves of immigration. So my parents came here in 1990. I am not a part of the wave of Iraqi immigrants, Iraqi American immigrants of around the early 2000s. I am not a part of the wave of Arab American immigrants in general of the 1970s. I am not a part of that. I am a child of the wave of Iraqi American immigrants around the time of the Gulf War. And that is, I'm a product of that. So from that lens, from that scope is where I started. And from there, I built upon my knowledge, and always make sure to think before I speak, because I grew up with a parent. One of my parents did not speak English very well when I was younger. I remember her not speaking English very well, my mother. And a lot of times I had to be kind of her spokesperson, because I love to talk, and I was learning how to talk very early in life and read and write very early in life. So I was kind of her spokesperson a lot of the time. So this was my kind of Arab American experience as a child, helping my mother and also helping other first generation Arab American immigrants in any way that I can, to be a kind of to be an ally. It's I am supposed to be the right-leaning one, right? I'm right-leaning. Some people say I'm right-leaning, and I'll be around a bunch of conservatives, and I'm the liberal one, and so I really at this point don't know. But I'm not as centered as Scott, who's very centered. I need to meditate every day before I become as centered as Scott. But yes, so I really try to be that that liaison, to be the middle woman between the two, because that was my duality in growing up. So this is funny that I'm making this kind of argument, because it may sound very similar to a framework of arguments that liberals make, the stay in your lane argument, right? You are not, for example, I don't know, you are not gay. Don't talk about gay issues. Don't talk about LGBT issues. You are not a part of the LGBT community. Or you're not a woman. Don't talk about women's issues.
The whole thing of like, oh, you don't have that lived experience, so you can't commentate.
Not having the lived experience. It's not that. Because then all social scientists would be useless. And that's been, it's demonstrable that not all, hashtag not all, that not all of us are useless. Some of us really do have a passion and fervor for our fellow woman and man. And we want to take social science and use it for the greater good. Some of us are good guys and gals. But there are some, there are some voices out there who want to say things like, you know, you need that lived experience. However, as a social scientist, I don't have lived experience with skin bleaching. I don't need it. Really sad. I wish I could get a tan. I don't even get a sunburn, Scott. It's very weird. I don't burn. I don't tan. I think I need to go to Australia and see what happens. But
Yeah,
nothing happens when I go out in the sun.
I pretty much guarantee that if you were here for any length of time, you'd quickly
get a little bit of a bronzy look, a little glow. I don't. Yeah. So I have no lived experience with skin bleaching. I am ghostly pale. I'm sad about it. I wish I could get a tan, but I can't. I have no lived experience with skin bleaching. I actually, if anyone can recommend a self tanner to me or something, because the sun doesn't work for me, I want to be bronze. I want to be a bronze beauty. I use filters. My friend suggested, use filters if you want to be tan. Just use an Instagram filter, like the one that makes you a little bit darker. Just because, you know, I'm with sometimes in pictures with my family, I'm like the one that like shows up like Casper. I'm a little ghost. No, but yeah, so I obviously have no experience with skin bleaching, but I have a lot of knowledge of the horrors of skin bleaching across the world, across the globe. It is terrible. It's an epidemic. To me, it is terrible. It's an epidemic. When I see a woman who is just beautiful, and feels the need to put these harsh products on her skin and bleach her skin, and the testimonies I've heard, it's absolutely abhorrent. It's absolutely terrible. I have no lived experience with this, but I have experience collecting empirical evidence up on this. So this woman not only has no lived experience, she is a creative writing professor. Scott. Scott. She's a creative writing professor. So where are any of the credentials? Does she live in the Middle East for a little bit?
Yeah, it's
and
very
she had
strange.
to say such an ugly thing, right? She had to say such an ugly thing, which of course her voice is the one that makes it on the news.
Well, of course, yeah, that's the one. I think that's like the bigger problem with, you know, obviously sort of discourse in general is no matter what sort of view it is, it's sort of like, okay, whichever view is the one that gets the most attention, that's the one we'll sort of put front and center, no matter like if it makes any sense or not, if there's any actual, you know, intellectual value to it, like, and that's the thing. And that's the thing. Like, you're almost like incentivized to say incendiary things like that because now she's got all this sort of attention. Sort of other radical, like left-wing people, like, yeah, good on you, well done, and like, and they're sort of going to be like energized to say similar sort of crazy things. And it's just like we're living in like a really weird moment,
right?
Sort of in our like cultural and social discourse where you're almost like encouraged and incentivized to act this way. Like there's no sense of, you know, decorum or, you know, actually thinking about what you're saying, like as you were saying. It's just sort of like, okay, what can get you the most attention, what can get you, you know, viral or whatever, and that's sort of like the only thing that seems to matter anymore.
Right. I mean, gimmicks and being a provocateur, being a Howard Stern, what do they call him? The shock jock, right?
Yeah.
I think, was that the first time it was that expression really caught on, calling someone a shock jock? Was, I don't know, maybe prior to that, I don't know. But my point being is there are ways, in a funny way, to garner a lot of attention. why is there this trend among the second generation of Arab Americans to use extremism, extreme ideas to garner attention? There's so many other things I can list so many other things that you can use to garner attention. Humor, intellect, sticking to creative writing. I can go on. There's so many other things besides being hateful and embarrassing to her community.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate that these sort of things happen, and like I said before, like no one is sort of talking about the impact that has on sort of the rest of the Arab community, on people such as yourself who work so hard to, you know, create a good sort of image and reputation for other Arab Americans, and then obviously all that sort of work is just sort of negated by just this one person, their crazy tweets and the just sort of completely inappropriate actions. So yeah, it's very unfortunate that these sort of things continue to happen.
It is quite unfortunate, and as I said, they end up being kind of the representative voice, and my heart goes out to the first generation of Arab American immigrants, the new Arab American immigrants who are coming in, who are freedom lovers, who are seeking freedom, freedom of religion or freedom from religion, who are seeking free speech, who are seeking life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. They are truly seeking these values. They want to integrate. They love this country. They love what this country stands for. And then we have this spoiled individual who, unfortunately, is not the only one. There are many more like her. She's not the first. Where I randomly see a second generation Arab American having big opinions about things going on in places they didn't spend as much time in as other people, or even studying. So I really don't know where the experience comes from. I don't know where these radical thoughts come from and radical ideas, but it does nothing but hurt the community.
Yeah, I think it's just like a classic case of the Dunning-Kruger effect. Is sort of like, you know, the less that you know about a topic, or the less understanding you have, the more highly you think of yourself and those views relating to that topic. And I think this is a classic example. Someone who clearly has next to no like actual lived experience or anything like that, yet she's so confident and, you know, pronouncing an absolute like this is how the world is. Oh, you know, Barbara Bush is this monster and all that sort of thing. You know, despite the fact that you look at her credentials, look at her experience, and you know, there's nothing there in either case. So
I'm embarrassed for her and for the university. So, and I would love to see this sort of commentary end. Really, I mean, there's freedom of speech, and I love that. I love that we have freedom of speech, but there's no freedom from consequences. And knowing that you have a better grasp on American culture and on and probably on the most widely typical language. We don't have an official language here in the United States, contrary to popular belief. We do not. So English, which is, you know, more widely spoken in the United States, depending where you are in the United States, it depends what language you'll hear the most. But usually you'll hear English, and after that there will be another language, usually that language being Spanish. But depends regionally. Yeah. In addition, there is the English speaking factor. She's also a creative writing professor. She has a great grasp on the English language. So if you have somebody who's speaking English perfectly and saying these things and being a spokesperson for the Arab American community, and then you have a new Arab American immigrant who loves their country, who is patriotic, who is totally against these ugly words, and they are speaking with a heavy accent, and they just sound like a villain from a terrorist movie. I mean, let's just be real. Let's be real. whose voice is going to be is going to make it on the mainstream news. Let's be real about our society and how it works. Let's be real about social psychology.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think also it's we should probably mention briefly. So obviously now I guess the attention is going to turn to Fresno State University and sort of what reaction they're going to take, whether they sort of fire her or suspend her or what's going to happen there. Do you reckon they'll actually sack her, or what do you think will happen now that this sort of outcry has happened?
American universities, they tend to take tenure very seriously. So I've seen professors who are obscenely incompetent keep their positions, keep their roles. I won't go into details, but I've heard things through the grapevine. I've seen things myself, and it happens. So she could very well remain in that university. And also, I do think that probably the community is going to, or the university, sorry, has not a lot of knowledge about this sort of thing, and is again looking at her as the spokesperson for the Arab American community, and may very well support her statement out of political correctness. This is the fruit. This is the fruit of political correctness.
All right, so that is the end of the Conatus Views podcast for today. I'm Scott Davies with Sarah Al-Irakia. If you like this episode, click like and send a comment on the YouTube page. You can also follow us at Conatus News on Twitter and Facebook at Conatus News. My personal Twitter handle is at ScottJDavies01, and Sarah Al-Irakia, your handle is?
It is at L_Irakia. So we will link in the description of our social media handles and where you can find us. And share this video far and wide. Share it with your mom. Share it with your grandmother. Grandmothers love me. Mothers love Scott. Yeah, share far and wide. And thank you for watching.